Hi Spring fans, welcome to another installment of Spring Tips. You know, this is a very special installment because while I intend to give you a lot of stuff to chew on, to think about, this episode has homework, right? It's not just about the mental sort of rumination of what we're going to talk about, but I expect you to go actually do some things after we watch this. And so in that spirit, I'm going to try and keep this part of the exercise as quick as possible. You see, what I want to do is to kind of look at some of the things that were interesting in the SpringOne 2021 event, which we just had last week. Obviously, there's a lot to cover, and I couldn't begin to cover all of it myself, nor could a handful of us, but we can certainly try. I watched several amazing talks that I wanted to talk to you about, but of course, I'm not the only person that was there. We were joined by tens of thousands of other people, and so I asked two other people at VMware, two other people on my team, Tiffany Jernigan and Mario Gray, what they thought, and they'll be joining us as well for their summary sort of recaps of what they liked and what they didn't. Now, obviously, there's a lot of stuff here. We don't purport to be able to get it all condensed into this one little list. These are just starters that you can look at. For people that were at SpringOne, those videos are going to be available for next few weeks, I'd expect, and then they'll be made available to everybody, right? But right now they're only for SpringOne attendees. So if you weren't there, and it was free, by the way, you could have and should have been there, then you'll just have to wait a few more weeks. Bookmark this link, bookmark this video so that you can know what to watch in a few weeks when those videos go live, okay? All right, first things first, the day one morning keynote. I was privileged enough to be the MC for that event. I was nothing but an MC. I'm very happy to report I didn't have to do a lot of work. All I had to do was sit there and sort of be the interstitial between the amazing speakers that were there. And those speakers included Spring Framework co-founder and lead Jernigan Haller, VMware Senior Vice President Ajay Patel, Morgan Stanley's Dhiren Shah, Microsoft's Julia Lucian, 821's Kristen Bland, and of course Loyola University's Sakina Hoffler, Professor Sakina Hoffler. I got a ton out of this show, right? I got a ton out of this brief 60 minutes with these amazing people. The theme of the keynote, of SpringOne is flow, right? It's all about staying in the zone and having that ability to move quickly to production. And so obviously, there's some really great things here. We wanted to set the bar really high right out of the gate. So right out of the gate, we saw Senior Vice President Ajay Patel announce the Tanzu application platform, which strives to bring the developer productivity experience typical of higher level platforms like Cloud Foundry and Heroku to Kubernetes and to Kubernetes operations. It's a big deal, my friend. I can't wait for you to learn more about this. There's a lot here, and obviously it's the first significant effort that we've seen where we've tried to marry the productivity of Spring with the sort of operations sort of mindedness of Kubernetes, and it's going to be huge. I can't wait for you to see more. The other thing that we did in that keynote was we saw Jernigan Haller, Spring Framework co-founder, number 2 on the Spring team, more than 18 plus years ago. We saw him talk about the themes and sort of goals for Spring Framework 6.0. Can you believe we're already at 6.0? That will come out in late 2022 along with Spring Boot 3.0. And there are several big things here, but we'll expand on those when we look at Jernigan's breakout session in just a minute. But namely, key here is that we'll have a new baseline for our dependencies, for our APIs, for Java and Jakarta EE, and you'll see support for native binaries, GraalVM native ahead of time compiled code. It was a really, really amazing hour, and I think every minute of it got better and better. And by the time we got to the end of it, I was just blown away, just stunned. What a great way to kick off the show. And it was a high bar, but you know what? I feel like I feel like the team, I feel like the community, they more than met that bar. Speaking of Spring Framework lead and co-founder Jernigan Haller, he did a breakout session called From Spring Framework 5.3 to 6.0, wherein he expanded upon his keynote remarks. He looked at the revolutionary Spring Framework 6. This release, as I said before, assumes a Java 17 baseline. Now, Java 17, of course, is a long-term edition of Java, and it's a big deal, right? I mean, currently, if you're using Spring Framework 5, you can park your code as on a version of Java as old as Java 8. Keep in mind, there have been more versions of Java after Java 8 than there have been versions leading up to Java 8. You understand? That's by that metric, by this very simple mathematical metric, Java 17 can be said to be more than twice as good as Java 8. And so I really hope that people will have already long since upgraded to the more recent versions, and for them, that this will be a non-issue, it'll be a non-problem. Spring Framework 6.0 assumes a Jakarta EE baseline revision as well. Some of you will know that Oracle famously just stopped responding to emails from the JCP several years ago. And this preceded, I think it's like 6, 8 months, 9 months, something like that, where they couldn't do anything because in their JCP process, everything has to be ratified by the spec leads. And as Oracle at the time was a spec lead on a lot of key APIs, nothing could happen, right? This meant that they couldn't release a new version of Jakarta EE, or sorry, Java EE as it was then known. This meant that the entire community was just sort of forced to sit there wondering if things like JPA would ever be updated, things like servlet API. Thankfully, eventually, Oracle sort of came to and they agreed to donate the code, signaling that they had no appetite to continue their investment in it themselves. They donated the code, but long story short, thanks to politics and things that have no business in software, as a clause of their donation, they stipulated that the new code couldn't use the Javax namespace, so javax.servlet, javax.jpa, etc. All that was no longer going to be valid. They couldn't update the spec with the new namespace. All the old APIs could stay as they were, exactly as they were, but as soon as anything has changed in those APIs, they have to use the new package name. And so this code was all donated to the Eclipse Foundation, where it was all repackaged under Jakarta dot. So Jakarta.servlet, Jakarta.jpa, etc. What does this mean for you? Well, it means that every Java EE application that's ever been written breaks, assuming you're importing any of those types, right? So that's not good. But it is what it is, I suppose. If you're using Spring, then it's entirely possible you're not using any Java EE APIs at all, right? And so this won't affect you. It'll just be sort of secondary or tertiary concern. It'll be behind the APIs that you use in Spring. But what we're doing is we're making it so that we are updating our dependencies to reflect these new changes. Okay, so if you are using some of these APIs, be prepared to do a find and replace. For the most part, one hopes anyway, fingers crossed, it'll be a non-issue. But again, you've been warned. You've got at least a year to start thinking about what that's going to look like. The other thing I'm really looking forward to in Spring Framework 6.0 is native AOT support. That is to say, directly integrated support that comes out of the box for native images, or put another way, AOT images, ahead of time compiled images. You've probably, no doubt, seen one of the 4 or 5 different videos I've done on Spring Native, right? Which is a project that we have that has as its goal the integration of GraalVM and Spring applications. That work has come a long way, and we're going to fold a lot of that into Spring Framework proper. It might look a little different by the time it gets there, but the goal is to take all the work that we've done, all the learnings, all the insight, and to make that a out-of-the-box component of Spring itself, so they don't need a third project on the class path. I am super excited. There's a bunch of other stuff that Jernigan talks about. Don't sleep on this particular talk. This is a big one. You know, we talked about flow, and we talked about helping developers remain productive, and we talked about what we're doing to make Kubernetes a more productive experience for people with things like the Tanzu application platform. But for a lot of people, for right now, there's still a sort of disconnect, right? There's still a very different feel when it comes to our daily, everyday experience of writing Java code intended for Kubernetes, which is to say the time that we spend in our IDE, changing code, reloading it, debugging it, etc., and the path that our code then takes to production, presumably through a continuous integration or continuous delivery pipeline. That continuous delivery pipeline might take, minutes or, some fraction of an hour for it to finish successfully, right? That's a problem, of course, because that means that we have to reconcile that productive sort of experience of writing code in our local machine with the actual experience of deploying that into production. And that means that we don't know whether our code looks correct or whether it's going to work correctly in production until we actually do that. Wouldn't it be nice if we could sort of unify those two loops, that inner loop where we are in our IDE changing and debugging and reloading code, and that outer loop where we see code deployed into production? Wouldn't it be great if we could be sure that what we have working in our machine is also going to work in Kubernetes? Ideally, if you're doing it correctly, you're running code in Spring that doesn't depend upon the cluster being there, and it shouldn't require that. But on occasion, you might need to know that certain things work in a particular way in the platform. And so this talk by the good Dr. David Sire, co-founder of Spring Boot and Spring Cloud, aims to introduce ways that you can support that workflow to make your experience doing both Kubernetes and Spring development all that much more productive. Truly a well-recommended talk. I've seen some of the talks that he's done before on this very topic. He's written, giant guides and things like that. But this is the best, most compressed way to get so much of that amazing information in one place. Well worth a watch. Up next is GraphQL Java contributor Andreas Marek and Spring Web Ninja Rosen Steinchev's talk introducing the brand new project Spring GraphQL. Spring GraphQL is a project that aims to bring the GraphQL programming model to Spring web applications, whether they're imperative using servlets and traditional I/O or reactive using Netty and the like. Spring GraphQL is a really interesting programming model because it simplifies what it means to write code that does mutations, to do subscriptions, and queries. I love Spring GraphQL. It's just really well integrated. It's really clean, it's really elegant, and it builds upon the GraphQL Java project, which has been around for years and has already helped people get to production in a reliable way. So to have that robustness and that richness now integrated in a very idiomatic way that makes sense if you've ever used any other component model in Spring, whether it's for RSOCKET or for Spring MVC or Spring WebFlex, that's wonderful, right? I'm just very happy to see that. You're gonna love this, definitely check it out. The nice thing about Spring GraphQL is it's super easy to learn. I mean, the basics anyway. You can have a hello world application up and running in virtually no time. So watch this talk and you'll be ready to go. And Spring, of course, takes it to a next level, makes it even simpler to understand. This next talk is by Matt Rabel and Brian Demers. They're both Java champions that work at Okta, a company that specializes in helping organizations secure their systems and services. These two Java champions have forgotten more about application security than I'll never know. They both work at Okta and they spend their time trying to make it easier for application developers to secure their applications. They've worked closely with Spring Security and with Spring Boot and even the teams behind them over the years to cultivate the smoothest OAuth and OIDC integrations in the business. These folks are amazing, and I would happily watch either one of them for an hour. So to see them team up was just a real treat for me. They talk about higher level concepts, right? Higher level application security concepps. It serves as a great primer for anybody who's looking to learn about security fundamentals. And obviously, if you know some of this, great, but you probably don't know all of it. I certainly didn't know all of it, and I've been asking these two questions for years, so I was just really happy to have it all put in one really easy to digest talk by these two. The next talk was by two of my favorite folks, Brian Semboden and Deshaun Carter, who both work at Redis Labs and help people find their way to production with the Redis database. Redis, of course, is a Swiss Army knife database for people who are trying to build applications at scale, right? It's a multimodal database that solves a number of use cases particularly well, and it enjoys a really smooth integration in our Spring Data module. Deshaun and Brian, of course, are two world-class engineers and speakers, so it was really cool to hear them both talk about some of the cool things happening in the world of Redis and their integrations in Spring. I was looking forward to this, and I was not disappointed. What can I say? This next one, I got goosebumps. I couldn't believe it. I launched my career on the back of the amazing book, Thinking in Java by Bruce Eckel. That book meant a lot to me, and I wouldn't be here without that book. Truly, I read that book in the late 90s, and it changed my life. I loved it so much that I sent a letter to Bruce Eckel, which he then reprinted in one of the editions of Thinking in Java. So if you look at the reader, the reader letters or reader testimonials, whatever, in the inside of the book, you'll see an appreciative, fawning letter from a younger Josh Long at starbucksman.com. I have the domain still. I don't have anything there, although I suppose I could. But it's wonderful that now in this SpringOne 2021, we had Bruce Eckel join the one, the only, the amazing, the inimitable, my friend James Ward for a tour of the modern Java platform. Now, don't get me wrong, both of these folks have been working in the JVM community for decades. They're legends in their own right. They've been working in the JVM community and other communities, right? Both have a wealth of knowledge, a fount of knowledge working in different languages like Scala, Python, ActionScript, JavaScript, Java itself, and Kotlin. And so it was just really cool for them to be able to look at some of the amazing things that wait for you if you make the jump to the newer versions of Java. It was just great. It was really, really good. And of course, it's informed by their experience with all these other languages. So it's great to see them kind of dissect some of these new features and see how they relate to things that you might know from other languages and other platforms. Really, really cool. And again, goosebump inducing for me. What a wonderful moment. A series of fortunate events building operators in Java was a talk that I didn't expect I was going to want to watch, but I'm so glad I did. Spring engineer Bella Bai and Alberto Rios look at how to build Kubernetes operators in Java. Operators are a design pattern for people building infrastructure in Kubernetes. Right? They're a program that helps you manage Kubernetes clusters, and they work with the API itself. So I kind of like this stuff insofar as I've been doing a lot of it in the last couple of years. Now that we have Spring Native, it makes a lot of sense to be able to build an operator with Spring. But I don't know everything about operators, and it was just really great to see this sort of in-depth tutorial. Obviously, if you have that particular use case, and being honest, I think you should, right? There's a lot of potential there, then you should definitely check out this talk. I was very glad that fellow Java champion and my friend Angie Jones accepted our invitation to return again for her second year at SpringOne, and she gave an amazing talk called "The Build That Cried Broken: Building Confidence in Your Continuous Integration Tests." Angie's the queen of test, right? She's a fellow Java champion, an amazing Java engineer, and she has a wealth of experience helping organizations like Twitter manage their test architecture. It was really cool to see her sort of introduce a lot of the different concepts in testing, particularly as they concern continuous integration in this talk. I took a bunch of notes. The talk's only like 40 minutes, but it's beautiful. She put these amazing slides together. I just loved it. Really, really great. And of course, that's paired with her always amazing presentation and humor. So check that out, bookmark it now, watch it now, and enjoy.
I was given the awesome opportunity to MC the keynotes on day 2. It was a super cool and first-time experience for me. First, we had Raghu Raghuram, VMware's CEO, to kick off the day. Afterwards, Craig McLuckie asked 3 important questions about the Spring ecosystem. How are we working to bring the vibrant Spring and cloud-native ecosystems closer together to solve real problems with Tanzu application platform? What are the implications of this work beyond the boundaries of the Spring ecosystem? And where is our work going over time, and what can we expect in the months and years ahead? Ben Hale and Valentina Laria from VMware helped us answer question 1 with an excellent demo, and Craig answered the other 2. Definitely go check these talks out. Next, we had Mike Stevens and Ruchi Gupta from Voya Financial. It was really interesting to hear about how they improved their customers' experience and modernized their developer experience. My favorite part of the conference was watching Yanitin, Marcin, Tommy, and Shavindri's debugging session using observability tools. It was great watching their thought process, and it was also very funny. You might think of jumping all the way to Kubernetes, but there are some things in between first. If you're new to the container space, Nigel Brown gave a talk called A Developer's Introduction to Containers. Nigel put it very eloquently. A container is a process or group of processes running in isolation. I've really enjoyed this talk, even as someone who has experience with containers. I like how well he explained containers in a much complex way. I'd never heard of security as code, or SAC, prior to seeing security as code, a DEVSECOPS approach. It's a methodology of codifying security tests, scans, and policies directly into the CI/CD pipeline. Sound interesting? Great. Let Alvaro Munoz and Tony Tralba from GitHub tell you more about it. Another ticket item before Kubernetes is testing. Testing is super important, seriously. Layla Porter gave an awesome talk called TDD and the Terminator, an introduction to test-driven development. Layla mentions that tests can become a starting point to your documentation, and adds a great place for new team members to come in and see what the code should be doing. This really resonated with me because my first programming job started off with reading existing tests and writing new tests. Together, they really helped me understand what was going on in the code. Additionally, the interweaving of the Terminator, yes, that Terminator, made testing sound a lot more interesting. If you've been struggling with TDD, the one thing she wants to make sure you take away is to write the least amount of code to make your tests pass. In the talk GitOps Your Kubernetes Runtime in You by Buoyant's Jason Morgan, we learn why GitOps is so important when building and deploying platforms. I like this talk because it introduces tools like Flux and Argo CD to easily prepare a Kubernetes environment for you. The less time you spend building environments, the more time you can spend watching SpringOne videos.
Building Spring Cloud Dataflow applications was one of the most exhilarating workshops that I've given. In it, I was able to stitch together an HTTP service utilizing nothing more than a few clicks of the mouse and some simple configuration. I didn't need to write any code. How? Check out Spring Cloud Dataflow, check out its applications, the designer UI, and it will let you stitch together an application that you see fit and to push it into any environment that you see fit, either if it's Kubernetes or local. A talk that I liked coming out of SpringOne was the one by Martin Lippert from VMware, Microsoft Sandra Algrim, and JetBrains' own Hadi Hariri. It was called Beautiful Spring Tooling for the Masses. And in it, they basically told us comprehensive ways that the tools of like STS, IntelliJ, and VS Code can be used to develop Spring Boot applications with ease. The next talk that I enjoyed at SpringOne was called Modernizing Customer Messaging at T-Mobile by T-Mobile's own Al Guerreri and Raj Palanisamy. I had some good takeaways from it, including taking code and thinking of it as configuration, and then decoupling your data from services. They have a very interesting messaging platform because they're a global communications company, so messaging comes first class. They also have the tenet of being customer focused first, and then having the knowledge that any system that you build will eventually break. The next SpringOne talk that I enjoyed is called Multi-Platform Apps with Spring, KOTLIN, and RSOCKET, presented by Anton Arapov and Ole Dokuka. The takeaways I got from this were, basically, I want my KOTLIN to sometimes compile into Java bytecode. Not all the time, but sometimes I want JavaScript. And remember, this is possible with KOTLIN because of its multi-platform abilities. The next thing I liked was the single expression functions. Basically, writing a function and then using a lambda to fill in that function. KOTLIN allows this, and it makes writing functions a breeze. One of my favorite SpringOne talks is called The Art of Clean Code. It's given by Chiamaka Okenwa. It talks about how developers should be able to understand your code and what you need to do in order to make your code understandable by others, and how that can lead to simplicity, understandability, and maintainability.